AI world is moving so fast that it can be hard to keep up with all the developments. One of the most significant new concepts in legal AI is Agentic AI. To help make sense of how Agentic AI fits into the picture, I'm delighted to be joined today by Greg Dickerson. Greg is the Chief Technology Officer for Innovation, Infrastructure and Operations at LexisNexis globally. Welcome, Greg. The title's a handful, but I think I managed it.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks
It
for being with
definitely
us
is.
today. I'm Claire Linwood, and I'm a product manager here at LexisNexis based in Sydney. So let's get into it. First, Greg, could you talk us through what agentic AI is and how it differs from the more familiar generative AI?
Absolutely. So agentic AI is when you give models, the more familiar generative AI, the ability, one, to reason so they can think through what they're going to do, and two, to use tools so they can actually go and do things. And often the combination of those two means you can refer to them as agents because they become almost autonomous. They have goals and they can go off and work out ways and how they're going to achieve those goals using the tools you've set out for them.
Thanks, Greg. Could you talk us through a little bit about this concept of reasoning? Because I think it can be kind of hard to get your head around the idea of a model reasoning and how it might be different from how a human reasons. Could you talk us through that and kind of how that developed in the last couple of years?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's almost not different the way human reasons, which is what I find quite amazing. So originally when we had models, what they did was they predicted the next word in a sentence. Nothing major about that. But as they got bigger in scale and we got more and more content and data that we put into them, they got to this point where they became quite intelligent in the sense of they could produce really long pieces of text that made sense. And then we could turn those into questions, which is when ChatGPT arrived. So rather than asking them to predict the next word in a sentence, we asked them to predict the answer to a question. But generally, there was just by using your permutations and combinations and having had a huge amount of information behind them. Then came this real concept called chain of thought, where rather than telling them how to just fulfill the answer, we told them to first think about it before they gave us the answer. And surprisingly, this completely changed the game and models became really intelligent. We call it inference. And if you look at OpenAI, for example, they have two different types of models. They have ones which just answer the question and ones that use chain of thought to think first about how they're going to answer the question before they answer the question. And those are the O3, the O1, the O3, the O4 models versus 4.0, which is your original type of model.
Thanks, Greg. And I think if anyone is interested in the audience, is interested in kind of the research behind this work, there is a great paper called A Chain of Thought Elicits Reasoning in Large Language Models or something like that. And it's kind of interesting to read that and see how some of these capabilities are quite emergent. When you've got a large language model, it does things, it can do things that you might not have expected at the beginning. And Chain of Thought kind of came out of one of those, is my understanding. So really, yeah.
Exactly. And it's very interesting that you can prompt a model to think about how it's going to think. And it's almost like we do as humans, right? We think about what we're going to think. If you want to really work through it. So remember, you think about, like, say you're in a maths exam and you have to answer a maths problem.
Take your time.
You just
work through
take
it.
your time. Exactly, right.
100%. Getting on to lawyers and law firms, could you talk us through how agentic AI can benefit lawyers and law firms?
Completely. And this is an active area of product development and research for us. If you give a model the ability to think and reason, and you give it a goal, answer this question accurately using these tools, it's amazing what it can come up with. And so this is how it can go from just asking a model to draft something, asking a model a simple question, to saying, I want to achieve this goal, which could include a bunch of research and then maybe a draft. Or it self-evaluates. It looks at what it's given you, reevaluates what it's done, and improves the quality of what it's done, which is a big amount of what we've done in the last 6 months or so, where we've made our models much better by getting them to actually reason about how well have I done in my answer, appraise myself, and then go back. So, for example, you could give a model something like, I want to do a contract, but I need to ground it in law. And this is the kind of law I need to ground it in. And the model can go off and do research, find the relevant legal precedents, bring them back, summarize them, and then work out how it's going to draft the contract, but then also appraise itself and say, okay, how well have I done? And that's what you could call an agent. Now, often what we do, though, is we don't put that all in one model, in one agent. We break it up into pieces and we orchestrate them. And this is where you get the idea of agentic workflows or different agents working to each other. And why we do that is because we like to specialize. Our whole economy is based on the specialization of labor. All of us are good and get better at certain things. You know, you could be good at marketing or programming or management or product management, and we work well together. And they've discovered that that's a better way to use agents, so you can focus them on particular tasks. And that's what we're doing at LexisNexis, is having the ability to have an agentic workflow. So you ask the question, we have an agent that reads and understands your question. It's an intent agent, is what we call it, understands your intent. Then it works out where it's going to pass the job on to, and may send that to a research agent, which goes some research for you. And then from there, it can then look at what the response is and then send it through to a drafting agent, which may draft a contract for you. And often you'll then have some sort of appraisal agent at the end, which says, have I done a good job? If not, let's loop again.
So to echo that back to you, instead of having one model that does everything, we have specialized agents and tools and reasoning engines within a whole workflow to kind of orchestrate that from end to end, similar to how humans would work together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. And there's talk now in the wider market from companies, some of the biggest companies. I'm not going to mention the exact names, where they're talking about having agents literally work with humans, give them an email address, and they can do particular tasks. You just send them an email, and they come back having done the task for you.
You mentioned this is a lot of the work that we're doing here at LexisNexis. Can you talk to us a little bit about our new product, Protégé?
Yes, so Protégé is firmly grounded in agentic workflows using agents. And a lot of the focus there is, one, on understanding your intent, but then also on making sure that we can reliably and accurately respond to that by using agents that are focused on particular tasks. So they could be something like a timeline service, or a research agent, or an agent which understands our case base, particularly, and understands citations. And then for using those together to give a much better answer, and also do long-running workflows.
Greg, this concept of personalization, I think this is fairly new in the legal AI world, except to the extent that maybe you could prompt the model with some context about what you were trying to do, who you were, what your persona was in the past. Could you talk a bit about what this means, like in a practical sense? What does personalization look like in the agentic workflow?
So agentic workflow, that you've got to give the agent goals to achieve. And one of the best goals you can give it is who you are and what outcomes you want. So personalization can come down to what kind of practice area you are, what your goal is in the particular matter you're dealing with, what the matter itself is, if it's a property matter or an M&A deal or something like that, because that gives the agent, and remember, these agents are grounded on very large language models, so they understand the wider context, they understand what M&A means. And then you give them that personalization that helps them to understand exactly what your goals are, which means they can contextually understand the questions you're asking, and then ultimately the outcome you want. Coupled that with the content that you give them, maybe the contracts, or if it's an M&A deal, or the due diligence documentation, and they can combine those two to be very effective at having that goal outcome, giving you what you need, even if there's some ambiguity to what you've asked them. Because remember, they use chain of thought, they do a lot of reasoning, and they ground their content both on LexisNexis content and on what you've given them. And so the net result is you get the best result out there. But of course, it requires you to tell a bit about yourself.
And I guess that also goes back to this concept of metacognition and kind of knowing what it is you need to prompt the model with to ground that personalization, because I think we often go for our work lives not knowing precisely what it is we're doing because it's so automatic. So it's this extra skill, I think, of needing to know precisely what you are doing and what your goal is in order to be able to give the model or the agentic workflow that context.
Such a good point. And I think some of the next, probably the next frontier now of AI is letting AI see how we think and learning how to describe how we think. And that's very much a lot of work we've done at LexisNexis in sort of getting prompting to the agents, which show them how we're going through a task, and therefore helping them understand how humans approach something, which is, and if you like, the next evolution of chain of thought.
Thanks, Greg. With sort of increasing personalization and integration of workflows into lawyers' existing workflows, I think the questions arise around data privacy and security. Could you talk a bit about what lawyers need to know in that space in order to engage with vendors and to implement agentic AI in their firms?
Yeah, completely. So when you're using an agent, you've got to give it context, or using any model, you've got to give it context. And context means you've got to give it an idea of what you're doing. And sometimes that means you can potentially put in PII or confidential data, which you should be very concerned about, unless you know where the data has been hosted, what's happening with the content, how long it's going to last, what purging it's going to happen, and whether it's going to be used to train the models. That's unusual for the models to be trained on content, but the other concerns are very much there. Is it leaving the Australian mainland? That's definitely something you should be asking. And how's it being used from a perspective of logging, training, etc.? So there are a lot of concerns there that are very different to the old days when you just used research platform and it was largely you were reading the systems, you weren't giving context when you're making queries.
Was going kind of one way rather than an interaction between your workflow and machine. Yeah.
Exactly. And you want the agents to have as much context as possible, because to have context means that they can answer your question effectively. So you've got to give them good content, because that way you're going to get great answers. So you just got to make sure that the vendor is managing your content appropriately.
One other question that comes up quite a lot is why use a legal AI model versus like a ChatGPT, for example. Could you tell us a little bit about why you might choose to use a legal AI product and what kind of role content plays in that, as opposed to a model that's trained on the open web?
So it's so different. I would never use a model trained on the open web that hasn't then been further refined. The reason why is, one, you want to make sure there's no hallucinations. And so we have a huge number of checks to make sure we're not hallucinating. And a lot of that comes down, one, to prompting, but two, to how we ground it in both retrieval augmented generation, which is the content we provide, but then also concepts like graph retrieval augmented generation, and then these agentic processes we've been talking about, where we can reevaluate how accurate is this. Have I created any errors? Have I created any hallucinations? We have made up facts, particularly things like citations, and the whole combination of all of that makes the model both higher quality, better performance, but also far, far less likely to cause trouble with the outputs that you may then take to court or give to a client.
And just going back to that concept of hallucination, so that's kind of the scenario where, for example, a large language model will make up a case citation because it recognizes the pattern of a case citation, but there's no actual authoritative database that it's checking against.
Exactly.
So just to echo that back to you, Greg, in terms of using something like a ChatGPT versus a legal AI product, we're looking for different techniques that ensure that it's fit for purpose for a specialized purpose like legal practice. And we're looking at things like retrieval augmented generation and other methodologies used to prevent things like hallucination. So you're sure you're getting the most accurate response.
Exactly. I'd say there's three parts to it. Grounding it in great content, which is what we're doing, prompting it and making sure that it checks on its own work, and then using reasoning so that it actually has potentially multiple agents that reflect on each other.
And by prompting in this context, I'm assuming it's prompting kind of in the back end, so something that the user wouldn't necessarily see, that it's ensuring you get a better result.
Exactly.
Awesome. Thank you, Greg. I certainly learned a few things about Agentic AI, and thank you so much for taking the time. I know it's slightly late where you are, so really appreciate it. Thanks.
It's great to be on. Thanks, Claire.